Part I.
Yeah.
Have my blueberries and the alternative.
All right, just gonna call our special Board of Education meeting and open session workshop to order. We have two sets of meeting minutes to approve. All right, I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting and open session dated May 11th, 2023.
Second. I'm sorry. You said May 11th, so last year's meeting minutes?
Yes,
Okay,
2023.
second.
Okay, Board Member Muldrow second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. That passes 7-0. And then I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting in open session dated May 15th of 2023.
Second, Nikki Vandermeer.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So tonight we have three topics to cover in our special meeting. The first is Southside naming, and establishing the naming committee. Next, we have Madison Public Schools Foundation here who will share some insights from polling. And then last, we will finish up with an update on our long-range facilities plan. So to get us started on the Southside Naming Committee members, I have a motion and there are attached documents related to the members of that committee. So I move that the Board of Education establish a 12-person committee for the purpose of naming MMSD's newest elementary school located at 501 East Badger Road, currently referred to as Southside Elementary. As set forth in the document prepared for this special meeting in open session workshop of the Board of Education dated May 6, 2024.
Second.
Oh, I further move
Sorry, I forgot that. Go ahead.
that two people be designated as alternate members, the need arise, as set forth in the document prepared for this special meeting, open session workshop dated May 6, 2024. And I further move that Greg Jones be designated chair of the committee to name the MMSD elementary school currently referred to as Southside Elementary School located at 501 East Badger Road.
Second.
All right, thank you, Board Member Pearson. Is there any discussion or questions related to the charge of this committee?
Not the charge, but just had a question about the committee members. Do we have any representatives from the community? Like in the attendance?
Yes.
That's it.
All right. Board Member Muldrow.
I just want to clarify based on your question. Board members all had the opportunity to nominate people to the committee, correct? Okay,
I believe that board members were asked if they had names, but I don't know if that. I'm not sure if that went to every board member or not.
okay. I will say I nominated people and I nominated people that I knew personally and also people that I was informed of by contacting people who both worked at the school and sent their children to the school. So that was my priority in my nominations, are that they were staff at Southside and that they also send their children there.
Right. Any other questions or comments? All right, hearing none. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. That passes 7-0. That brings us to our next topic, which is to have, oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Board Member Mosner Feltham. Oh, your hand's not up. Okay,
Nope, that was a vote. Sorry about that.
no worries, no worries. All right, we are gonna move on next to then Madison Public Schools Foundation, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna get over to you.
I can start off a little bit and
Okay.
then Melinda, I'll hand it over to you. I know we are still waiting for Luke to come on, right?
Okay,
I think we said he was here about 6:45, right? But let me do a little talking first, and then, Melinda,
sure.
hand it up to you.
I have an hour prepared remarks.
Oh. So, as Nichelle was saying, we have 3 agenda items. And we are going to do a brief courtesy conversation with, Melinda from the foundation and then Luke on behalf of Insight, related to the polling that you did, in support of the advocacy work for the school district. Then after that, we'll have a longer conversation likely about the long-range facilities plan. So you have a copy at your seat, fresh off the press. Paper copy of the long-range facilities. And just know that we have been taking your feedback over the last couple of months to inform this plan. We're actually pretty happy about how it turned out. And what we will do tonight is give you an overview of this. We know that you just got it, but you will have between now and the 13th to review it. In particular, review the recommendations section. It's section 6. Much of the plan is facts. It's enrollment reports. It is capacity. I know a couple of you had asked about school capacities. What does that look like? So that's in there. There's some information in here about past facility upgrades that we've done. So this is really sort of the factual data and information that will help the board to make some decisions when it comes to referendum. The real meat of sort of the exact what, when, and where would come in a, Bob, you're gonna hold me to this, in a longer plan. Long-term capital improvement plan, right?
Perfect.
That's the one that's really important with all the implementation. That will be built off the set of recommendations that's in section 6. We've already had the big sort of placemat facilities condition report, which was used to come up with some of the recommendations. You'll see actual school names listed.
Which I brought.
Um, Yep, which you brought tonight, great. So, so just know that we wanted to give you a week to look at it. We'll do an overview, sort of what it's built from, have a week to look at it, and then, we'll discuss it again on the 13th, and we'll really lean in on that recommendation, section. And again, remember, this is an overview. It's not every single thing we're doing, but it does set our direction, right? As we move into potential referendum and have to make some decisions about a potential question. So it really is about providing the facilities that our students and staff deserve. And then it will set the stage for the long-term capital improvement plan. Mr. Soldner, that you have taught me, that is it. Okay, so I will stop there. And Melinda, do you want to start with a couple introductory words for us?
Sure, and as Luke is gonna be very precise, so I will talk slowly while we wait. Go ahead.
Can I just make a suggestion? You could flop slides 8 and 9 right now.
Yeah.
Talk about those and then come back to Melinda when Luke joins us in about 5 minutes.
Sure. Okay.
That
Is Jeff able to get those up?
yes, please.
There we go. Okay. Great suggestion. Love it.
Yeah,
Okay.
give a little more breathing room, right?
Yeah.
So as you begin to look through this lovely document, I want to remind you about all of the recent community engagement feedback that we have done. So this beautiful Venn diagram, which I love Venn diagrams, so yay, was put together by research, RAI for us. They did a beautiful job. It brings together the three big components that we had around community engagement. So remember, we had the community surveys, we had the advisory group, and we had multiple community budget and facility sessions together. So across all of those, we tried to talk about where we heard different themes and where we heard overlapping themes. Center to everyone. they want us to center equity, and they want us to prioritize critical needs. So that was everyone talking about that. And then we had differences of opinion on some things. So some groups, like the community survey, talked about learning from the past referendum and executing these plans. They talked about COLA increase. But then when we looked at between the community sessions and the surveys, we heard more about supporting staff, reducing class size, and need basic facility updates. When we shifted more towards the advisory group, we heard themes around varied opinions around the 20-year plan, and there was a much more comfortable nature to the 4-year or to 6 to 8 year plan versus the 20-year referendum plan. We also heard from the advisory group that we needed to work our trust, but the new superintendent was an opportunity for us to do so. The community sessions talked about support for literacy and dual language immersion, and also had specific academic needs and facility upgrades that they talked about. So between all of these things, we took all of their feedback and we brought it into the long-range facility plan. We move on to the next slide. I'm also going to take the opportunity, as I always do, to remind you of our timeline. So I love myself a good timeline. So as a reminder of where we've been, we had phase 1 of our community engagement sessions. We had our first community survey. We have been doing some analysis and drafts on our report here, and we've been coming to you and sharing bits and nuggets of information as we go. So today we're presenting the long-range facility plan, which is a big kickoff for us. And we're then beginning right away tomorrow, our community engagement phase 2. So that'll go by the attendance areas. We're also starting our second community survey as well this week. And then as a reminder, we're looking towards June as when the board is going to decide if they want to go to referendum and vote to approve potential referendum language if they choose to do so. The last possible date to do this is in August. And in November, we would go to ballot if you choose to go to referendum. And with that, I'm hoping I bought some time for you, Melinda.
Yes. I have a
Back
thumbs up.
to Board Nichols, to Board Chair Nichols. No,
There's Luke.
Why, there's Luke.
there you
Yeah.
go, all right.
All right. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I think everyone knows me, but for the record, Melinda Heinrichs, President of the Madison Public Schools Foundation. And in a couple of months, I will celebrate 8 years on staff.
Wow.
I think you also know advocacy is a really critically important part of our mission. So to that end, in 2020, we created a separate legal entity, a 501c4 called Schools Make Madison Advocates, to build out our platform and to enhance our advocacy capabilities. It's under that umbrella that we manage referenda campaigns, starting with, of course, the 2020 Vote Yes to Invest campaign in support of the $350 million Future Ready package. Should you vote in June or otherwise to move to referenda in November, we again stand ready to manage that Vote Yes campaign. In preparation and to guide us, a few weeks ago, we did engage for polling through our 501c4 to have a sense of where community support sits and to also test some messaging. And you can imagine that these are really important tools to us in the private sector to determine how to engage and communicate with local voters. Said another way, it's a way for us to figure out how do we most effectively run the campaign if indeed the board chooses to go to referenda. So as a courtesy, and because we are close working friends and partners, we wanted to share top line results with you tonight. And with that, we hope that you find the information to be helpful. We certainly are looking forward to using the information as we continue to build out what the campaign might look like. But with that, let me introduce Luke Martin, who's Vice President for Impact Research, who's joining us from Washington, DC. So Luke, take it away, but I hope you find this to be helpful as you continue your discussions.
Yeah, thank you, Melinda, and thank you all for having me here. If somebody can just give me screen sharing access, or and if the slides are already in your system, either way works.
Sorry.
No worries. Well, while we're figuring that out, let me just kind of start by saying, I thought this survey had a lot of really good news in it. With any sort of ballot initiative polling, there's a lot of key metrics that we're looking for. We clear most of the major thresholds here, which is always kind of good news at the start of one of these campaigns. But also, I think as important, I think it's very clear from this data that just attitudes of voters in Madison in general are, pretty favorable to the district. People clearly, appreciate the quality of education that people are receiving in the city of Madison. They're satisfied with, how the district does its job. And I think, as a result, there is, I think a good amount of willingness and appetite to increase funding for Madison Public Schools. Let me go ahead and get into some of the specifics here. Are folks able to see that okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Great. Let me go ahead and jump in here. Just to kind of put everybody on the same page as far as methodology. Again, we're talking about likely voters here. So we're basically screening to people who we think are likely to vote in the November 2024 election. We are, collecting interviews using essentially the gold standard in polling at this point. We've got a multimodal survey here, live interview dialers through both landlines and cell phones, mixed with what we call text to web interviews, which is where we text a respondent from a voter file, a link to the survey online. But between the live interview or cell phones and text to webs interviews, we've got over 80% of interviews here conducted via cell phone. Data, pretty fresh out of the field, a little bit over a month old here, but again, I think still pretty ripe. We were in the field March 19th to 21st. And if anybody's interested in margin of error, we've got a plus or minus 4.9 percentage points here. So good to keep that in mind here. The good news being, most of our sort of key metrics for support are kind of well above margin of error thresholds here. Let me start with just a little bit of context of where, perceptions of the district stand now, which again, I think is, mostly positive news here. Overall, you've got a majority of voters in the city of Madison who do rate the quality of education positively. Overall, you've got 56% who say it's positive, 23% who say it's negative. And then you've got about 1 in 5 voters who basically just don't know enough about the sort of education system to basically, offer a guess either way. Now, I did do the polling for the last series of referenda back in 2020. Obviously, a much more kind of complicated environment then. We did do some polling pre kind of pandemic lockdown. And then even, kind of we're one of the first polls in the field kind of after the pandemic started, really kind of gauging how things had changed there. But looking sort of pre-lockdown numbers here, pretty much in line with where we were back in, late 2019. We're seeing a little bit of bump in negative here as kind of more voters are tuned in to education. That is something we've kind of seen nationwide in a lot of these education referenda polls. There was a lot of focus on education during the pandemic, so just generally kind of people have a little bit higher awareness. So seeing a little bit of bump in kind of conversion from that gray don't know bar to that red negative bar from 2019 till now. But again, overall dynamics here pretty similar. Again, you had a majority who rated the quality of education positive back then. You've still got a pretty solid majority now. You've got kind of less than 1 in 5 voters who said it was negative then, around 1 in 5 negative now. The other, I think really kind of positive thing here, though, is when you look at people who actually have kids in public school, that's almost entirely positive there. You've got 73% of parents with kids in public schools who rate the quality of education positively. And then the negative numbers are essentially in line with voters overall. So not really kind of seeing any difference in negativity among parents and voters overall. which is a good sign. You want the kind of people at the core of this to be the most positive, and that's what we're seeing here. Also good though that people who don't have kids in public schools, they're not more negative. So there's just not an assumption in the city of Madison among people that don't have kids in schools that there's an issue with the quality of education. A lot of times we see that in cities that have issues with their education system. Not seeing that here again. The numbers for people with kids not in public schools look pretty similar to voters overall. You've still got a majority positive and just around 1 in 5 who rate it negatively. Another really important atmospheric metric that we look at is how satisfied people are with how the district spends the tax money that it receives. And again, really good news here. You've got a plurality who are satisfied with how the district currently spends its money at 46%. And you've got more people satisfied than not satisfied by a 16-point margin overall. So again, you've got 46% satisfied, just 30% not satisfied. And then about a quarter of voters overall who, again, just kind of aren't familiar enough with what the district is doing to venture a guess either way. The other, I think, kind of standout positive thing to me here is anytime you're doing kind of ballot initiative polling, you always want to pay attention to some of these more tax sensitive subgroups. A lot of times we'll look at home ownership, we'll look at income. In both cases here, the groups that we normally pay a lot of attention to, homeowners and higher income earners, are both more positive and more satisfied with how the district spends its dollars than voters overall. So you've got a majority of homeowners who are satisfied at 54%, and also a majority of those who live in households making more than $75,000 a year satisfied at 52%. Again, both of those are, tend to be kind of more critical subgroups normally in ballot initiative polling like this. So again, really great to kind of see them starting off more positive even than voters overall. So just starting generally, we're in a pretty good place attitudinally with voters in the district, and we really do kind of see those attitudes translate to support for any kind of funding increase and just a general appetite for giving the district more money to improve education. Obviously there's a lot of complexity potentially with the ballot initiative coming up here. Sorry, was there a question?
Hurry, that's where I screwed up. That's where I screwed up.
I'm sorry.
Sorry,
That
that
was-
was clarifying a point, but I didn't understand it. I didn't want to interrupt any other way.
Oh, no worries. Feel free to interrupt. I mean, is there something I can go back to? Is that helpful?
No, she explained it completely.
Okay.
I misunderstood something on reoccurring versus annual, and that's where I was getting screwed up.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if people have questions, I mean, feel free to jump in. I'm happy to go back, explain anything. If anything's unclear, yeah, feel free to jump in. So again, there's potentially, a lot of complexity with the ballot in November here. So what we did, before kind of getting into the different scenarios that might kind of show up in terms of, different funding scenarios and different kind of combinations of ballot initiatives, what we did was ask just a general question. Do you support, paying higher taxes to increase funding for Madison Metropolitan School District? Now, with any kind of ballot initiative polling, again, there are these kind of very clear thresholds that we're normally looking for. You're almost always wanting to see a yes vote start above 60%. And then you're always wanting to see support generally outweigh opposition by a 2-to-1 margin. And you normally like to see strong support outweigh overall opposition. The really great news here is we're essentially at or clearing all of these thresholds. So just general support for increasing funding for the district, even if it means paying higher taxes. You've got 64% overall who would be in favor of that. You've got just 32% who would be opposed. So again, kind of meeting that 2-to-1 margin that we're looking for, clearing that 60% threshold for overall support. And then we've got strong support at 36%, which does outweigh total opposition by a 4-point margin. So again, kind of really clearing all of those thresholds that we normally look for here, just in terms of general support for paying more taxes to increase funding. We've also, once we kind of get into the specifics of the ballot initiatives, we kind of see almost a 1-to-1 translation from that general support to support for a specific operating referenda. So here asking about $100 million over the next 4 years. Very similar numbers. And again, clearing all of those thresholds that we like to see. We're above 60% total support here at 62%. We've got a 2-to-1 margin of support to opposition, which is at just 31%. And then we've got strong support outweighing total opposition by a 9-point margin. Excuse me. So seeing all those numbers really kind of translate from general support to the specifics with basically a kind of 1-to-1 translation, which is really great. Not seeing any kind of drop off there as we get into specifics, which is quite common with any sort of ballot initiative polling. Support also does translate pretty much 1-to-1 to a 4-year facilities referenda as well. So if you look at the 4-year, that's going to be on the left there. You can kind of see there's kind of one section of this chart that has a blue bar, and then the right section has a purple bar. The 4-year is going to be the blue bar. The 20-year is going to be the purple bar. So when we're looking at the 4-year, again, we're kind of clearing all those thresholds that we normally like to see. We're above 60% at 63% total support. We're outweighing opposition by a 2-to-1 margin, with opposition at just 25%. And we've got strong support, pretty clearly above total opposition, strong support at 36%, and then opposition again at just 25%. So an 11-point advantage there for strong support. Now, when we look at the 20-year, then things get a little bit less clear. We kind of get below those thresholds that we normally like to see. And we did, just in terms of the methodology of the survey, we did rotate these questions. So half of the sample heard one question first, half of the sample heard the other question first. And we do this in order to avoid any sort of anchoring bias. And then we also can look at, is there a difference between people who heard the 4-year first versus 20-year first, and then how they answered the subsequent question. There was no significant difference statistically between, kind of how people who heard one first versus the other answered these questions. These numbers were pretty consistent regardless of which version they heard first. But again, while we see the 4-year clear most of these thresholds, the 20-year version on the right there at just 50% total support is a pretty good margin below that 60% threshold that we normally look for. We don't have a 2-to-1 margin for overall support to overall opposition. Opposition at just 31% here, still kind of, again, below that 2-to-1 threshold that we like to see. And then we've got strong support, pretty much in line with strong opposition, and actually, not exceeding total opposition as well. So you've got strong support for the 20-year at 25%, 6 points below where we've got total opposition. I will also say, we did ask about the sort of 20-year dynamics versus the 4-year dynamics and a few other questions in the survey. We could really kind of never get it above 50% in any kind of combination that we tried. These numbers were, again, fairly consistent, regardless of kind of how we looked at the data or sort of what questions we asked to try to get at this. So just to kind of wrap things up here, I know we're kind of running out of time. Again, I think in general, we're starting in a really good place here. Perceptions of the district are very positive, both in terms of the quality of education that it's providing and how it's currently spending its tax dollars. There's not really a lot of criticism in terms of how the district is operating. Nothing here to suggest that people would be apprehensive with giving the district more money based on how it's currently operating. We start off, in a good place in terms of support as well. Again, clearing those kind of thresholds that we normally look for in terms of both general support and then how that general support translates to support for an operating referendum and a 4-year facilities referendum. The 20-year referendum, as I mentioned, doesn't quite meet those thresholds. And especially, I think, with these sort of challenges around complexity on the ballot that are potentially in store for the November ballot, I do think the 20-year would be a much more difficult measure to pass. But with that, let me stop there. I'll kind of leave this up there for a second so folks can read and digest it. But hope that was helpful, and then happy to take any questions that folks have as well.
Great, Luke. I see a question from board member Muldrow.
Yeah, this presentation is incredibly helpful, and I think in a lot of ways really exciting to get to think about. I think there is the question of our ability to pass the referendum. There's also our ability to execute what we're promising in the referendum in order to engage our community proactively in a conversation. And so I think how these questions relate to the details of the referendum is relevant to me. So when you're looking at something like a 20-year investment versus a 4-year investment in facilities, were you to ask that question related to the job creation of the district over the course of that 20 years related to facilities? Or were you to ask that question specifics to sustainability? Would that alter the way that those questions poll? So are you in favor of the district being 100% renewable energy by this year? And are you interested in investing in facilities? Are you in support of the district creating over 10,000 jobs related to the construction of our, infrastructure for our schools? How does the specifics of the referendum impact buy-in when you talk about these polling questions?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, with any campaign, obviously, communications and sort of potential messages obviously have, the ability to impact support. We did ask a series just about kind of in general, the specific uses of potential funding and what people were most in supportive of. We did find, the sort of more critical maintenance needs, preventing teacher layoffs, the sort of more short-term impacts that the funding could be used for generally had much higher support. Where things like investments in clean energy, sort of those more long-term investments had much lower support. And then just kind of generally what I would say is, obviously with any campaign, your ability to communicate those positives is going to be kind of the main obstacle for increasing support for the measure itself. So while, you can obviously ask a poll question that has all those positives in it, your ability to then go out and communicate and kind of educate people on those is really the sort of main thing that kind of stands in the way for making that a reality. So we did kind of take into account, some of those messaging, options here. Again, generally it was the more kind of short-term critical needs that kind of resonated most with voters and increased support the most. But again, your ability to communicate those is going to be kind of the critical question here.
I greatly appreciate that. I just have one other question. In our last set of polling data related to the last referendum, I'm sure you remember this. We saw significantly less enthusiasm around the referendum in the poll than we actually saw during the election. And given the fact that this ballot will look tremendously similar to the 2020 ballot, how does kind of the partisan politic dynamic influence this election in terms of our ability to have this question on that ballot?
I think basically what you're asking about is turnout, right? What's turnout going to look like in November 2024? I think I wouldn't be a pollster if I knew the answer to that question. I'd probably be a much wealthier person. That's kind of the truly honest answer there. Polling itself, I'll be super honest, is a bad predictor of turnout. We obviously make assumptions based on prior electoral data over what an electorate is likely to look like. So that is what this survey is representative of. Obviously, you can have a huge increase in turnout from 2020. I don't think that's likely here, to be quite honest. If anything, I anticipate turnout in 2024 to be, not historically low, but certainly on the lower side of where modern presidential elections have been. So in that case, you're sort of more likely to get your higher educated voters turning out, your higher income voters. Again, that's sort of why we've kind of paid them so much attention in the analysis of this data, anticipating that there will be kind of lower turnout. Those voters do also tend to be more tax sensitive. They're just kind of more critical of any time somebody is asking them to spend more money on their taxes. So I wouldn't anticipate sort of an environment where people are just generally more favorable to a funding increase or to a property tax increase. Certainly, again, if there were a scenario where things were to change and where we started anticipating, a higher turnout election, that can obviously change. But based on the way things are going right now, I would not anticipate that happening.
I think that that's a really important factor to take into consideration. I think, you know, the polls have genuinely had a hard time gauging what youth turnout will look like in elections and engaging younger people in polling itself. I do think that we might want to be pretty specific in looking at voter turnout trends in terms of the performance of Dane County and the Madison area. That's it for me.
Board Member Vandermeelen, I see Board Member Simkin first, and then I'll come back.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Thank you. I really appreciate this as just a really positive indicator of how people are feeling about the district. I do have some questions just to dig into the data a little bit further. First, I'm wondering, what was the sample size?
Let me pull that up. We were at 400 400 interviews here with likely voters.
Okay, and how did the demographics of those who were sampled reflect or not reflect our greater community?
Sure. So the way we kind of determine the demographic makeup of a sample of likely voters is we look at past electoral data. So we basically have voter file information of who has voted in the past. And we basically, try to match what this data set or sample looks like to kind of trends in past voting. So basically this is representative, not necessarily of the community overall, but of a subset of people in the community that are likely to vote in November 2024.
Okay. Were you able to tease out, did you ask questions about demographics then, or was it only, are you likely to be a voter?
Nope. Yeah, we asked a whole demographic battery. So we're asking, gender, age, education, race, ethnicity, income, whether or not they're a union household or not. Happy to kind of share with you the full kind of demographic battery of questions that we ask, but they're basically kind of standard demographic questions, especially, again, anytime you're doing ballot initiative polling, there's specific demographics that you always want to ask. Again, whether you're a homeowner or renter, that's an important one to include specifically for ballot initiatives, as is income. So we've got kind of the specifics around ballot initiatives represented there as well.
I'm wondering, would you be able to provide us with a written summary that dives deeper into some of those nuances?
I think that is honestly probably a question for Melinda.
This is the information that we're able and willing to share in a public domain.
Understood.
Okay. My last question is, did you ask any question that led to an indication of what level of tax impact people were comfortable with for those who voted yes or
Yep.
maybe yes?
So we did have a question that basically explored tax impact as well as sort of the different scenarios of what would be on the ballot. So we did ask that in here as well. The good news is, both of the schools' initiatives still are in kind of passing territory, factoring in both ballot complexity and the tax impact. Though I will note in that scenario, the 4-year does do a bit better than the 20-year in both of those scenarios.
Are you able to provide the questions that you asked or say out loud? Maybe not in writing, but say out loud what those questions were. I'm trying to get a little bit of a deeper understanding of that.
I will refer that again back to Melinda if she is comfortable sharing that.
So
Okay.
I think I'm losing track of which questions, because the questions are on top of the slides, right, Luke?
Correct.
So,
we obviously
yeah.
have more questions that were not.
But yeah, but I'll repeat that this is highlights and it's designed to be highlights, and that's what we're able to share.
Okay. Okay. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Board Member Vandermeelen?
Yes, one question, one comment. A question, did you, and I don't know if you can answer this, did you ask on the demographic of disability data?
I'm sorry,
Did you ask on the demographic on disability data and whether or not?
I do not have memorized the entire survey instrument. Luke?
We did not. That is information we do have available on the voter file, so happy to take a look at that. But we did not ask it as a an asked demographic in the survey.
And just because 15% of the school population is, I assumed our community might be as well. That's why I was curious on that. And I would like to tease into that further in the future. My comment is as follows. One, I'm liking the 4-year referendum. I'm not real comfortable with the 20-year referendum, but either way, my one criteria is, and why I'm on this, is that operation to me is always gonna be more important and has to be larger to make sure our teacher and our staff are taken care of first. Yes, I understand the need for buildings, and I want fully accessible buildings. I want the best for our students, and our students deserve the best. But when push comes to shove, students aren't just gonna remember a building as much as they're gonna remember a classroom teacher. So that's all I'm gonna say. Thank you for your work. I truly appreciate it.
Of course.
Any other questions or thoughts coming up for board members?
Just a lot of appreciation. Thanks. Thank you, Luke and Melinda, always. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great. The other thing I just say is, if folks have questions, I'm the guy that always has like 5,000 questions the second I hang up a phone with somebody. So if folks have questions, Melinda knows how to get a hold of me. Happy to be a resource for people if that's helpful. And hope the data was helpful. I think there's, again, a lot to be encouraged here. And look forward to staying involved.
Thanks, Luke.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Luke.
Luke.
See ya.
Luke.
Thanks all.
Okay, Melinda, anything else?
No.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks so
Well,
much.
you're welcome.
Appreciate your
Really
advocacy.
helpful to-
Yeah.
To see
This was huge.
polling results.
Yeah, it fills in some gaps for us, and it
Yeah.
also helps us to know that, we still hold ourselves accountable in the community for providing the accurate, right information. So yeah, thank you, Melinda.
Of course.
Hey, just one thing I wanna follow up on, if I could. So Laura, your question about the dollar amounts, it was in Luke's presentation. It was 100 million for operations over 4 years. And then the two facilities questions were 344 million over 4 years and 1,040,000,000 over 20 years. 1,040,000,000 over 20. And those are in his slides on the top as he went through.
Okay,
I just
Yeah.
wanted to point.
Thank
that out.
you.
Yep.
thank you, Bob. I guess, yeah, I was wondering if it got broke down further for people to talk about their individual tax impact. But I'm understanding we're not gonna be diving into that right now.
Next week, we can talk about that a little bit more.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
I will just say that, the board, we might remember that we started a community referendum advisory committee. And we had one meeting, the first week of April. I have been meaning to type up some notes and send them to you, but what I heard that night was kind of similar sentiments around the 20 years felt like too far out for people to imagine. There were a couple of suggestions that night that like if you wanted to get a little bit of a longer facility, kind of runway, maybe you could look at like 6, maybe 8, but what I heard in that conversation was that people had a harder time thinking about all the things that can happen and change in the course of 20 years. So I'm only sharing that to say that I think when I heard the committee members share that, and then that kind of showed up in tonight's polling, I guess I was like, oh, yeah, I heard that from some of the people that were at our committee meeting. So I don't know, to your point, Board Member Muldrow, if there was a different way to communicate about sustainability or job creation or other kinds of things, if people would be more responsive to that level of detail. But what I heard from that referendum committee was that the more we can be strong on like the high quality education, the instruction that we're delivering, the value of our educators, do you know what I mean? Like that there's a lot of like positivity around that. So I just thought I'd share that until I can get you the notes. Board Member Muldrow?
I will say that like, I think we've discussed this already, that even for me as a board member, the 20-year plan, although I favor having significant planning time and the ability to commit strategically, I think given the volatile reality of our economy over the
Right.
last 4 years.
Yeah.
It was very hard for me to imagine that we would be able to lock in what those numbers should look like over the
Right.
course of 20 years. And I know we talked about that briefly, Bob, and I thought you did a really good job of kind of explaining the benefits and some of the risks in that, but I do think that question is intensified by the fact that over the course of the last 4 years, we've had to really factor in the pandemic and inflation in a way that we didn't necessarily anticipate when we passed the 2020 referendum.
Great. Well, Melinda, thank you so much for
I figure
being-
I love a Bob presentation.
Yeah,
gonna stay
because
for the
I'll-
Bob
I will
presentation?
thank you so much for
Yes,
getting the polling done and
yes.
having Luke and that team share the results. That's
Yeah.
super helpful for us.
You're welcome.
Jesse, I think we can probably go back to the slide for that. No, but it-
Jen,
Yeah.
I'm a bit old to Jen's headline. No bikes.
Yep, perfect. Okay, Mike, I think I'm turning it over to you.
Very excited to present this next step to the Board of Education tonight. Having been involved extensively in the last two referendums, working on this long-range plan really gave an opportunity for reflection. And I'll give you two quick. And first, an opportunity to thank the community for what we accomplished in the last referendums. And secondly, just a reflection of all that has been accomplished and will still be accomplished by the fall. As a person who was involved intimately, to see it come to fruition is very exciting. Tonight is the result of several months' work from the referendum team. And your input has been important in drafting this and will continue to be important as we go through. So, and I think that as board members, you can feel very good about the things that are being accomplished. Next slide. I think you skipped. Yeah. So I'll talk just a little bit about this and first with the policy, and we've talked about how minimally every 3 years, the pandemic paused that plan. The last one was completed in the 1920 school year, really prior to the pandemic. And it really, if you recall, if we went out with the community, we talked about we'd be doing a referendum in 2020, and we will probably be back in 2024 based upon the needs of our facilities and the funding situation. So tonight's, as Lisa mentioned, is just an overview, some initial discussion. Next Monday, you'll have more opportunity to go in depth, and then on the 20th, you'll have an approval. And so when we talk about the purpose of this really, as Lisa mentioned, brings a large amount of facts in one area and then makes some recommendations based upon what we've learned and what we had foreshadowed in the previous referendum. So I look at this long-range facility as a large amount of information to assist you, the Board of Education, in making the decision of a possible referendum. And again, as mentioned previously, this really involves what we have learned since the pandemic, and it also really talks about our learners, and the staff that serve them each and every day. This long-range plan will be posted on the website. And it'll be in the weekly update. Last slide. Or next slide, I should say. Last one for me before I hand it off. So I want to give you just a couple of things to look for as you go through that. So as always, we begin with an introduction. And we really look, the next section then, these are individual sections, looking forward with a focus on teaching and learning. And we know that the end users are critically important in coming up with what it is we're looking to do. And so I think that's been driven home for me when I went through Capitol High and saw that we designed that for an alternative high school. And if you haven't been through it, we would love to take you through because it is an amazing facility that really meets the needs of that school. And I couldn't be more excited for Capitol this year. Okay, then the next section is the current projected enrollment and the building capacity. And so we look at building capacity and operational capacity this time, which really is if you take out all the rooms that are used for other things, how much capacity would the building have? So that's a little bit different. And I think we mentioned that Dane County and Madison area is supposed to grow 100,000 in the next couple of decades. So we have to be prepared. We have to be ready for all the students that are coming our way. The next one is the past and ongoing facility maintenance and updates. And this was really interesting because sometimes you hear, well, you're going to referendum because you defer maintenance. And in reality, we have spent through the board's action since 2008, close to $200 million in addition to the referendum on projects. And you might remember that I've talked about some of those in the past, like the elevator towers, like at Whitehorse and Toki Middle School. So as we've been able to do projects, we have added them in through, this would be the Fund 41 and Fund 10. And when you add staff, it's close to 400 million. And then when you add in the HVAC updates for ESSER, again, another, I think, 12 million. So I want to be real clear that we've really accomplished a lot in addition to the referendum. And that's what that section really talks about. And then the next one is the current education facility. And that's nothing, you got that information. And remember, we've talked about that being the periodic table of the chart, the grades for schools to help us focus on what the priorities are. And then the next section is the focus on sustainability. And we've talked all along about that being a lens from which this work continues to unfold. And then lastly, so when you take all of these other sections and all that information, then the last section narrows it down to this is what our recommendations are for a possible referendum. And so it's a lot of information, but it narrows it down to say, based on what we foreshadowed in the last referendum and based upon what we've learned in the engagement so far, conversations with the board, this is our suggestions for referendum. So I can't tell you how honored I feel to be working on this again. It is really good work, and I'm proud of the board for working with us and our taxpayers for supporting our work. I'm handing it over to my colleague Bob, so thank you.
Mike.
And I think this really was a collaborative effort we have been working on for months with building services, PRA, design engineers. Quite a few people have been involved in this, and it has been quite a task. It has helped us do a lot of things which we needed to do, and we wanted to give you as a board the best information you could as we look forward to what facilities need. So really, to put it in the proper framework, we know we have significant facility condition needs. You remember the facility condition report from last fall identified just under $1 billion on renovations alone for our facilities. No consideration was given to this building to a point where you should build new. It was just if these buildings were invested for sustainability, accessibility, all the issues of the mechanicals. There's a considerable price tag. And the reason being, and not because of lack of investment, as Mike pointed out, the monies that the board has invested in a couple of different areas. It really is more related to the age of our facilities that are over 60 years. And they need to be reviewed, right? And Mike went through in terms of the sections of the report that really tells you the thing that we need to continue to do over the next several months in terms of putting this into perspective and in terms of prioritizing which buildings we're actually going to look to and the kind of investment we can make in terms of that lens of saying, okay, we have a 60-year-old facility, academic standards have changed, needs have changed, right? So we need to be really thoughtful on do we renovate or do we build new? And that becomes a critical question. We are currently working in a work group, hope to have some final answers in a couple of weeks. To kind of give a first kind of recommendation on the list of schools that I'm gonna talk about, these 14 schools in terms of priority. Do we as staff really think these should be renovated or should they be built new given the facility, given the facility's condition, and the geography of the site the schools are, as we've talked in the past. So we will continue to do as we are in operating budgets, balancing for operation, maintenance, facility upgrades, the staffing. We continue to invest the vast majority of our funds and staff should and do and focus on the need for students. But at the School McMadison Summit, there was an excellent presentation made by a Senate Middle School and a part of a competition. And the point he made, the summary is the point he made is that, you know, I've been in other schools and competitions, and I think it really does matter if you are in a new school or a school that's designed to meet your needs, as air conditioning.
Yeah.
That is a good place in terms of facility, public spaces, it matters, right? And very insightful thoughts, and it was really I really enjoyed it, but it really brought home the need that we've been talking about, right? It's not just building a great building, it's making sure it meets the needs of the education. Okay, and we have talked to know there's a fine mix between ongoing maintenance, the need for significant dollars, which we talked about, which is one of our recommendations that I'll get to. But we need to identify more revenues than we possibly could have in our operating dollars under revenue. How long I can go off on revenue numbers. So we're gonna save that for Monday, the 13th of May. Okay, excited, Jesse. All right, I'm gonna briefly go over the 6 recommendations, and as we always do, we talk through all the issues, and so there's no significant order in terms of do recommendation 1 or do recommendation 6. These are a comprehensive list. Someone has to go first. But I think one of the standouts were the need to develop a long-term capital improvement plan. We picked a 20-year window in terms of long-term capital improvement plan. Really looking at that 20 to 25-year window. We're going to be able to do that when we get the student projections updated under a contract with Vanderwall. Again, that comes later in the summer of 2024, but it's a critical piece for us to know the demographics, shifting populations, where students are and what facilities should be our focus. Then one of the recommendations we have, and we've been doing this ongoing, but we think it's a very important recommendation for a lot of reasons, but to really do a thorough sit down with all of our vendors and all the participants, including teachers, including families and parents, really, even as we go forward, an after action review of what went well in 2020 referendum, not only the constructions, the implementation, because we have heard different things. Went great. I wish you would have done a little bit differently here. So we think it's real important that that we get a very solid, and clear comprehensive list of an after action review. We're gonna talk a little bit more about Fund 46 on May 13th, but Fund 46 is the tool. I really consider it, I can't remember what person told me this, but I consider it a tool in our toolbox of financing not only operations, but facilities. And so Fund 46 is an option that we recommend the board create a Fund 46. There's a couple of requirements related to Fund 46. The reason I really like us to consider that, is I think it's a really good and clear way of demonstrating that the board is thinking long-term, investing to the future. I will say, when we first were talking about Fund 46, I really wanted another tool if we went with the 20-year facility referendum. It gave us many more options to use different tools to save the money and designate the money. But I still think there's a value. There's a 5-year window in state law that you have to create the fund and let it sit for 5 years before you can utilize it. So I think we should, the recommendation is gonna be to create a Fund 46. Okay, next slide. The next one is, and we talked about it and how important it is really to continue to look at them long-term enrollment projections for a lot of reasons. One, we all know the growth that's coming to Dane County, where it's gonna be on our edges, it's gonna be in certain redevelopment areas where the student demographics are moving and kind of the capacity that we have at our schools. But it's a real critical piece for us to have. And I don't think we have to go more about that. I think it's really important for us to establish, and the recommendation is to establish a district-wide advisory group or committee to continue to talk about long-range facilities analysis and planning. And I envision a broad group, and it's to talk about neighborhoods, where families are moving, the condition of the facilities, whether the community in any specific school area would think renovate or build new. It allows us really to take a look at the academic needs. This would include, our continued emphasis on 4-year-old kindergarten, our continued emphasis on DLI programming in the space we have in each one of the facilities as the population comes. Plus, I really want us to more formalize with the board's involvement, an advisory group with the state superintendent, right? One of my afterthought reviews of 2020 between now and then is, wish we would have continued some of the conversation on a more regular basis, even as we are in the heat of the 2020 referendum. I think it's put a little behind, but I think this is just a consideration of that. And then finally, we're recommending a facilities referendum, right? And we just heard some pros and cons about a 4-year window of view and a 20-year window of view. And whatever process or method the board ends up going with, the need of our facilities are clear, right? And so you go 4-year, I think it works. I would say just like the cadence that was set up in 2020, we're gonna take a look at this again in another 4 years. We know we have facility needs that are gonna last 25 years, right? And so this is in it for the long term, and we need to continue us taking a look at it. Okay, Jesse, next slide. All right, so we identified, I will say, more schools than we could possibly manage in a 4-year facilities referendum, and probably not enough schools to manage 20-year facilities referendum. But the focus of this list of schools really is a mix of two things. In 2020, we told the community we're going to focus on comprehensive high schools, finding a home for Capitol High and building the Southside Elementary School. We said our next on the list would be taking a look at the middle schools, right? And so we have some middle schools and some paired middle school and elementary schools. that, based on the facility condition report, are really high needs. But the focus, as you can see, is, middle schools in each one of the 4 comprehensive high school areas. So we continue to focus, and then we know we have a need for both middle schools and elementary schools. But we really focus on the middle schools for the heavy lifting, and then, the 6 schools you see at the end, which are listed in rank order from 9 to 14, are really priority critical needs elementary schools. And it really becomes, how much do we feel, you feel, we can put on a referendum, right? But I do think, and then the other final factor again goes back to the student enrollment. We are gonna need our middle schools, no matter where the demographics of our district are shifting. So it is a wise investment to move to middle schools, right? I'm not saying anything about the elementary schools, I'm just saying, you all knew that, and the community knew that in 2020, let's take care of high schools. Next up will be middle schools, maybe some elementary schools, do the work that we've been doing the last 9 months, and get a better plan in terms of that 20-year capital improvement plan. So questions?
Board Member Vandermeulen and then Board Member Muldrow.
On the LREP recommendations in the schools listed, I know Blackhawk has handicap accessibility issues with the bathrooms. I don't, it was Sherman the other one, I'm not, I know there were 2.
Well, you might be thinking of accessibility with respect to some of the instructional
Yes.
places. And
That's what
that
it
would
was.
be both Blackhawk and Toki.
Okay, that was it. That was the one I was
I'm-
trying to remember and couldn't wrap my
Correct.
brain around. I think that's essential, and no offense to the district or anyone else, and we've done great things. But the federal government has been 33 years late in fulfilling that agreement of IDEA and funding, i.e. DEA at a federal level. And we're unfortunately forced to pick up the slack, but it needs to be done. That is not criticism of MMSD, that is solely criticism on the federal government and spending on that. My second comment is that I think the operation again is crucial. I think we need to balance the 2 together in a way where we can see the big picture without missing every little thing. The one mistake that I think we made last time, in my opinion, is to have the same amount for each high school, assume they could all fundraise the same way. We learned very quickly that that was the case, and I hope to avoid that this time. That was my biggest. Otherwise, I think the program is excellent, and most importantly, the other thing I want to say is, again, thank you to the taxpayers, and then especially those who work for us at MMSD. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you again for every single person who voted for the referendum, or we wouldn't be here.
I really appreciate your comments, Board Member Vandermeulen. I think I wanna talk a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts of how we've gotten to this current moment. And Mike, I think you really did a great job of talking about our consistent investment in our facilities, as well as our utilization of ESSER dollars, all of that happening simultaneously with the referendum. The referendum worked on all 4 of our comprehensive high schools, built Capitol High, and built a brand new elementary school. So that's 6 schools over the course of 4 years. Not to mention kind of the major construction projects that happened in relationship to MSCR and other major like installations of playgrounds via ESSER. There's been a lot of investment in our schools and our buildings and our grounds. Is there a way that we can see a pretty comprehensive breakdown of what all we have accomplished with ESSER and what all schools have been invested in via ESSER versus what has been our routine maintenance versus what is the referendum?
It may be, is it in one of the appendixes?
If that, did that already exist?
We have several there's a whole bunch of appendices, and that might be in one of them. If not, we can get that.
Right,
I'm-
and I want that in part because I think I've been here for all of those decisions, and it would be hard for me to really talk about the scale and totality of how each of those decisions has worked.
And I will say two things. I'm glad you mentioned playgrounds because I love the fact that we have understood that middle school kids, as a former middle school principal, need playgrounds, and they're very developmentally appropriate. It is very fun to watch our middle school kids out on the playground. And I would also call attention to the first one on the list was also Shabazz,
Mhm.
which was kind of surfaced as last time, like you're taking care of the alternatives. And the comprehensive high schools, what about Shabazz? And, you know, the conversation was, well, that would be in the next round.
Mhm. And I think that that makes a lot of sense because Shabazz is housed with a middle school. And so I think really talking about how to work with Sherman and Shabazz simultaneously as one thing makes a lot of sense. I think we've made, you said, I think 13 million, I want to say $15 million investment in HVAC beyond the referendum. So I do think just having kind of what schools have seen, you know, additional investment based on necessity related to ESSER could help us, you know, reconcile who we're spending a lot of time and attention on right now. I did feel surprised when I saw the list, and so I'm gonna shift from kind of the ESSER breakdown and where we're at right now, Mike, to you, Bob, and say, I was surprised not to see Nuestro Mundo or Alice on the list of schools that needed kind of immediate support, in part because, and this may be a misunderstanding on my part, so if I would like to be corrected publicly. But my understanding was we invested significantly in remodeling that school last summer in getting ready to move Alice into Southside and move Nuestro into Alice. And then when you came back and showed us the facilities report, they were still a D. Am I missing something around the Nuestro Mundo site in terms of why or how we're prioritizing them, I guess?
I wouldn't presume to think you're missing anything, Ally. I think the answer is, we have. We have 26 schools that are 60 years old or more, and we have. That have CPD. We have 40 schools that received a C or D grade overall.
Okay.
So it's a significant list.
Yeah,
And the priority is based on, if we go back to the facility condition report, the priority is based on 15 or 16 categories of specific issues that are each graded, right? And so you take a look at those and you really, how we got the priority list elementary schools, you take a look at those and at the mechanicals or the infrastructure. That
Okay.
are D. So although, you know, we have 40 buildings that are C or D overall, we have a facility need, but in terms of picking the priorities, one, as I explained, middle school focus.
Mhm.
And then the 6 priorities were, building services, working with our vendors on that list of 6 elementary schools that are part of 14.
and
You gotta
also,
look deeper.
Okay.
and also just reminding that we invested significantly in the 2015 referendum at Frank Alice, primarily to address accessibility issues. But I think there was some mechanical work done at the same time. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I think the hard thing is that that school kind of comes up as having more pronounced needs structurally. And so I'm just kind of curious as to where it fits in and how we got there. And Bob, I think your explanation like makes a lot of sense. Like schools are at an E or a C, and then you get into the specifics of why, and that dictates the urgency is kind of what I'm hearing from you. Which, you know, I think is relevant to saying like the projects that have the greatest impact are being prioritized. I think the other thing about how we prioritize what schools we're talking about is our overall capacity to address the needs of that building. So the other question is, how many buildings can we work with at one time. And it looks like there's a list of 14. And if you compare that to a list of 6, despite the fact that the schools are smaller and the populations may be significantly less than our comprehensive high schools, I'm curious about our bandwidth to work on 14 schools at the same time.
Couple things. I was gonna say a couple of things. That one, so we listed those schools individually, right? So it's not 14 sites, right? So that's a piece of it.
Oh, yes, okay,
And
thank you.
Some of the buildings.
Yes, I'm like, I didn't, thank you.
And secondly, I think the bandwidth is a really good question. And in some respects, identifying those schools allows us to perhaps do some of the preliminary work to set the stage for future work.
Okay. I think that's incredibly helpful because I think there is a obvious desire to do this work well, and I think there's the limitations of kind of time and investment. My last question specific to you, Bob, how is the interest rate factoring to this? I know that's not like a friendly question or a simple question, but one of the things that we got very lucky about in 2020 is that we saw significant cost savings related to interest in 2020 and in 2021. Does not look like we would be that lucky going into 2025. How is that dictating some of how we relate to what this will look like, and how we will talk about this with the taxpayer?
Yes, you're
Right, good questions. Kind of twofold. I want to add on what Mike was saying in terms of the sites. So one of the things in terms of looking back at 2020, and I think through lessons that we learned, is I'd like us to be able to, if we can decide we can afford it, taxpayers can afford it, is to be able to map out kind of the time now, right? Where all of our projects are kind of coming to a close in terms of 2020, and we're going to a referendum in 2024. So it really takes away the summer of 24 to keep improving our facilities. And one thing we've learned in the last 9 months is we have significant facility needs. So I'd like to build a little bit of more overlap. And if we're on a 4-year cadence, kind of that overlap on a 4-year cadence.
Got it.
Sir, in terms of the interest rates are what the market will tell us they are. We've looked at it, they're definitely higher. It really comes into considerations. It's a factor. We're just beginning to try to break it down in terms of the 20-year down to the traditional 4-year. There's, I would say it's important, but we're not going to change that, and we can't stop not focusing on facility improvements. And so it really comes down to the schedule of which buildings, how much, and when they're going to come, traditional debt issuance. For example, in the 2020 referendum, $317 million, we sold bonds over 3 different times. And we sold them over 3 different times because you sell the bonds when your bills come due, right? And so we're not gonna be able to control that. Could that add some? Definitely over a 20-year debt payment, it could. We're just starting to get into kind of how we should go about estimating that, but that's clearly a factor.
Does it, at this point in time, does it look like we'd be borrowing at a rate, at an interest rate between 4% and 7%?
That sounds like if I look back at when we did our defeasance, that could be, but honestly, I haven't. I wouldn't say that's what it goes.
Let's cross that bridge when we get there. Yeah.
Board member Mosner Feltham.
Thanks. I'm so excited to see it. Thank you. Thanks for all your work, team, on it. I have a question about how you're thinking about like working with folks at the city who are, you know, asking some similar questions about the growth in Madison and where and how to support it. And so I'm curious about if you could remind me, I know that I've asked a similar question before, sort of like what work you've done with people who are thinking about this, either in the city or the county. And in your recommendations, I was trying to think like where in these 6 recommendations I might see like collaboration with the city. And I thought I could see it in like the advisory group recommendation. Anyway, that's my question. I'm just sort of curious about the collaboration with folks in the city and the county.
I think that's recommendation.
Blair, it is part of the recommendation in terms of, yes, group 6. Two fronts, right? Kind of answer that. I think the work with the city will happen. It's happening now in a couple ways. I serve as the district's designee for the Madison Plan Commission. That's a positive thing. Downside of that is they often meet on Monday nights also, so it's hard for me to get a lot of those meetings, but I'm there and I've met the staff that support the Madison Plan Commission. We continue to work with the city on the side of potential referendum questions. I have a check-in with the city finance director, Dave Schmedeke. We talk about the issues and kind of the trends that the city are going. But the real work becomes when we create the advisory committee, plus once we start working with the vendors and others on that 20-year facility plan. That's when you really bring in the demographic changes, where the building is going, the density. We're gonna learn a lot from Vanderwall right now. They, the benefit of us being able to work with Vanderwall and updating the former projection is they actually created models for us when they did the last long-term enrollment projections based on specific neighborhoods that are now developed, so they can test those assumptions and those models and fine tune them. So I'm really excited for the kind of the detailed information we can get, because as we know, this year we pretty much leveled off and increased a little bit in enrollment, and no one was predicting that, which makes our job a little bit harder to estimate, I gotta tell you, moving forward, but it's a good thing, right? But I think it comes in to not only the recommendation for the Superintendent's Advisory Council, but a 20-year facility plan. A lot of factors come.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from tonight's long-range facility plan update?
Yeah.
All right, well, we will be, we have operations work group next week. Ask is that we read the plan, really think about the recommendations that have been put forward. And then some of this will come back at next week's meeting, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Exactly right.
Okay. I want to thank you for all of the work. I'm excited to dig in and click on all the appendices that you have here as well.
I'm sorry?
Say one.
I don't think so. We're done.
We are done. I will
Oh.
take a motion for adjournment, y'all.
So
So moved.
second.
I didn't know.
All right, I'll go with Vandermeulen for the motion, Pearson for the second. All those in favor, y'all.
Aye.